All right, everybody, good afternoon. This is Neil Burke, CRTPO Program Manager. Thanks again for bearing with us. We had some audio difficulties, but it sounds like everyone can hear us now. So welcome to the Discretionary Funding Application webinar. We expect this webinar to last approximately 90 minutes. Thank you to those who are participating today. This recorded webinar will be available on our website for later viewing. Because this is being recorded, participants should be muted. Please use the chat box feature to submit your questions throughout the webinar. We will take 10 to 15 minutes to answer questions at the end of the webinar. I'm now going to turn it over to Erin Kinney for a brief overview of the call for projects and today's agenda.
Thank you, Neil. We have a little less than 6 weeks left before the application deadline of October 31st, 2019. All applications and attachments are due by 5 p.m. on that date. Application funding decisions will be completed by December, presented to the TCC and Board for information in January, and for action in February. Please keep this in mind as you put your application together. Awarded funds will not be well into fiscal year 2020. For folks on the phone, if you could please mute your lines. We are recording the webinar, and we want to just have our presentation be part of the recording. Thank you. Today's agenda is broken down mainly by the different application types. Questions will be covered at the end. If you have a question that is very specific to your project or location, we may need to follow up with you offline in greater detail. And we will be capturing all of the questions that are submitted today. As Neil said, you can submit questions at any time through the chat feature. First of all, the application is a Google form. You should have received this link in an email from me on August 19th. The attachments you'll need to submit are referenced within the application, and you can send all attachments by email to Neil Burke. In addition to the application itself, you'll want to be familiar with the Discretionary Projects webpage. It contains the Discretionary Funds Policy Guide, recent presentations, and soon this recorded webinar and a webinar transcript. Here you can also review the questions in a PDF format. When you're first getting started, the PDF is easy to navigate to get a sense of what information you might need to gather for your responses. You may also find it's a good idea to draft your responses in Word or some other format that you can save while it's in progress. Once you start your application, you can navigate between the sections of the application and your answers will be saved. However, if you close your browser prior to clicking submit, your answers will not save for you to return to later. Therefore, you'll want to enter the information in the Google Forms application when you're ready to do so in one session. Below the application questions, you'll find 2 budget attachments. Attachment 1A is to be used for new capital projects, and 1B is to be used for shortfalls on existing discretionary funded capital projects. We'll go into detail on these documents when we get to the budget section of the application. Please note, if you are submitting an application for a local planning project, these budget attachments do not apply to your application. Also of note for planning funds applicants, please review the UPWP page and the resource guide there to familiarize yourself with the eligible activities and the requirements for requesting the funds. We will also cover local planning projects as part of this webinar. I'm now going to move on to the application. All applicants will complete this section, providing information about the person completing the application and the person who will be the main contact for managing the project. In question 5, you can also provide information on the roles and experience of anyone else who will be involved in managing the project. In question 10, give the project a descriptive name without being overly long. Question 11 is important here because, as the smaller text within it describes, your response will take you to the appropriate section for your application. The choices are 1, new request. This is a project not currently funded with STBGDA, TAPDA, CMAQ, bonus allocation, or UPWP PL planning funds. Number 2, existing CRTPO project needing additional funds. This would be a project currently funded with STB-GDA, TAP-DA, CMAQ, or bonus allocation. And then selection 3 is existing CRTPO local planning project needing additional funds, and this would be an existing project that is currently funded with the UPWP PL planning funds. These descriptions are pretty straightforward, but please note, if you have an existing project that has received some other funding, whether it's state safety funds, highway trust funds, or something else, and you are requesting CRTPO discretionary funds, that would be considered a new request. The project is new to CRTPO and to its discretionary funds process, and we want to make sure we're collecting the same data for all projects. If you're not clear on which option to select, please contact us as soon as possible. Once you make your selection here, you'll be directed to the next section of the application. We'll now go over each of the application types. Here, if I select New Request, the first choice in the list, it takes me to this screen. Here, we're going to select either roadway or transit. They take you to the same application, and we'll review those questions. Before we move on, please note, even though it says this is page 3 of 8 at the bottom, you only have one more section to complete. The other sections that it's referring to are all the other application types that are part of this form. Now I'm going to turn it over to Neil.
Thanks, Erin. In questions 1 and 2, we want you to identify the specific reason or reasons that this project is needed and how you expect the project will solve the problem. If you have specific data that you can reference, that is great, but it is not required. In question 3, identify the plans where this project has been identified. You should be submitting projects that have been included as a recommendation in a previous plan. In the case of intersection projects, if the intersection has been part of a previous study, you can note that as well. Moving on to question 4. In order for the project to be eligible to receive federal funds, all roadways submitted for improvements must be part of the federal aid system. If a roadway is in the process of being added to the system, you should apply for funds after that process is complete, as it can take several months, which would cause significant delays to the start of a project. If you have any special cases regarding federal aid eligibility that you would like to discuss, please contact CRTPO staff and let us know the details of your request. In questions 5 through 8, we're looking for key dates in the project schedule, whether they have already occurred or they're anticipated to occur. Question 9 is asking for any additional clarifying details related to the timing of the project, particularly for any urgent or imminent needs. Questions 10 through 25 relate to the project budget. As the language below question 10 says, you need to submit a detailed cost estimate and attachment 1A found on our website. We recommend completing attachment 1A, then plugging the information into questions 10 through 25. Erin is now going to review attachment 1A.
Thank you. I first want to go over the cost estimate requirements. As it says on page 9 of the Discretionary Funds Policy Guide, each discretionary project submittal must contain the following to satisfy CRTPO's cost estimation requirements. A detailed cost estimate that has been prepared by a qualified professional, such as a professional engineer or registered landscape architect. Cost estimates shall be no more than 6 months old from the date of project submittal. This cost estimate shall be prepared for full project implementation, including applicable activities such as preliminary engineering, environmental documentation, right-of-way acquisition, utilities relocation, and construction. On to the budget attachment. In line 1A, you would enter the estimated construction cost, including any utilities relocation cost. For line 1B, you would enter the preliminary engineering and design cost. Per the guidance in the funding policy guide, this should be at least 25% of the construction cost. If there's a reason for it to be lower, you can contact us and let us know. In line 1C, you would enter the estimated right-of-way cost. Again, these costs should be submitted by your cost estimate documentation. For the contingency amount in line 2, you'll select the percentage from the table below that applies to your project. The addition of project-based contingency factors will improve the accuracy of cost estimates and lessen the need to allocate additional funding to active discretionary projects. Depending on the amount of prior work completed for the project request, the following contingency factors must be applied. If no preliminary engineering and design is completed, it would be 40%. If preliminary engineering and design are complete, but right-of-way has not been acquired, it is 30%. And if preliminary engineering and design are complete and right-of-way is acquired, it is a 25% contingency factor. Project scopes that entail the purchase of buses and other vehicles under existing contracts are not subject to the requirement to add a contingency percentage. Next, we move on to line 3. The construction engineering inspections, or CEI cost, needs to be calculated as 20% of the construction cost and entered here. Please note, between the PE cost and the CEI cost, the applicable NCDOT administrative fees are included there, so there's no need to add those as an additional line item. Then, a minimum of 20% local matching funds is required. The percentage should be based on the total project cost, including the applicable contingencies and fees. If additional local funding is committed to the project, state the percentage of match where it is requested in the application and in this table. You'll also need to provide a municipal resolution or an official letter on the jurisdiction's letterhead that clearly commits funding the local match and identifies the source of the matching funds. Finally, the request amount will be 80% of the amount that is calculated in line 4 if the match is 80-20, or it will be less if the match percentage is greater. Now, back to Neil and the end of the application.
As Aaron said, for questions 10 through 25, you'll input this budget information based upon what you filled in attachment 1A. Next, question 26 lists the attachments that you'll email to me. Budget attachment 1A, which is required, a cost estimate prepared by a qualified professional that's no more than 6 months old, that's required as well. Map attachments, these are shape files with metadata. These are required as well. A letter from the jurisdiction confirming the local match, which is required, and letters of support, which are optional. Finally, under other, you can include pertinent project documentation that relates to the responses given in the application, including road safety audits and local crash data and reports. Once this question is complete, you can click submit and the application form will be transmitted to CRTPO staff. Next, we'll select bicycle and pedestrian projects as our projects mode, and I'll turn it over to Curtis to review that application.
Thank you, Neil. Question 1 here lists several destinations of interest and asks whether the project provides access to them. The goal here is to select 6 highest scoring destinations that are approximate to the project. 6 is the maximum that will be considered for scoring this question. In question 2, you are making calculations for each destination selected above by using the appropriate multiplier from the accessibility multipliers table in order to show how close these destinations are to the project. There is also an online resource for mapping provided here that you can use. In question 4, we ask, does the project connect to an existing non-motorized transportation facility or facilities? If so, how many connections are made? By transportation facilities, we mean access to other bicycle or pedestrian projects or alignments. If the project connects at 3 different points to a greenway, for instance, select 3+ connections. If only 1 connection is made, select 1 connection. In questions 5 and 6, we're asking about the project's inclusion as a recommendation in any existing plan. Question 5 groups plans into broad categories as far as the answers you can select from. Then question 6 asks for the specific plan or plans to be identified. You should be submitting projects that have been included as a recommendation in an existing plan. Question 7 asks, does the project include desirable amenities? Examples include, but are not limited to, seating, bicycle racks, repair stands, landscaping, unique wayfinding, public art, pedestrian lighting, fitness stations, and others. In question 8, we're asking about existing bike ped activity in the project area and or existing public requests for facilities. If community requests are a factor in your response of yes, please provide that documentation as an attachment. For question 9, are there documented safety challenges associated with this project? Examples can include recorded crash data of any severity or a posted speed limit. It's a yes or no question, and the yes response should be supported with additional documentation. In question 10, we're asking whether the project will reduce the exposure between motor vehicles and humans through a physical barrier or defined space. Examples of physical barriers include an off-road greenway, pedestrian refuge island, a bike boulevard with a vertical structure, or a buffered sidewalk. Examples of defined space include striped bike lanes, back-of-curb sidewalks, and crosswalks. For question 11, provide a link to the NACTO guidelines to help you determine if your project's design encourages traffic calming or vehicle lane narrowing. Question 12 asks, what is the average annual daily traffic, or AADT, of the affected roadway facilities from which the exposure would be reduced? To help you determine this, you can visit the link provided and select the applicable range. For question 13, follow the instructions outlined in steps 1 through 3 in order to calculate any reduction in vehicle miles traveled locally as a result of this project. In question 14, please reference the online mapping tool at the provided link to help answer the following. Does the project provide access, direct or adjacent contact, for environmental justice populations? Question 15 asks whether the project includes significant benefits which address wildlife safety, water quality, or other environmental improvements. Again, if you have any relevant documentation to support a response of yes, please provide it. In questions 16 through 19, we're looking for key dates in the project schedule, whether they have already occurred or they're anticipated to occur. They're pretty straightforward. For questions 20 through 35, you can follow the same guidance Aaron and Neil provided earlier about the budget attachments. Complete attachment 1A and plug in the corresponding information in the application questions. For question 36, complete the calculations as described here in order to provide a cost-benefit number. Please note, determining this score will first require you to complete these scores for trip generation and connectivity, safety, and health and environment earlier in the application. Question 37 lists the attachments that you'll email to us. Budget attachment 1A is required. The cost estimate prepared by a qualified professional, no more than 6 months old, is also required. Map attachments, shape files with metadata are required. A letter from the jurisdiction confirming the local match is required, and letters of support are optional. Finally, under Other, you can include pertinent project documentation that relates to responses given in the application, including road safety audits and local crash data and reports. Once this question is complete, you can click Submit, and the application form will be transmitted to CRTPO staff. Next, we'll select local planning as our project type, and I'll turn it over to Erin to review that application.
Thank you, Curtis. Local transportation planning projects had previously been funded through a separate process that was part of our Unified Planning Work Program, or UPWP. The criteria and the intent of this project type remains the same. The process for submitting the application has just changed to be in line with the capital projects process. If you are unfamiliar with the types of studies that fall under this category, again, you can visit the UPWP webpage to see lists of past projects, view a resource guide specific to local planning projects, as well as a 4-page quick facts guide. Eligible local transportation planning activities include corridor studies, access and mobility analyses, traffic alignment alternatives and feasibility studies, bicycle and pedestrian planning initiatives, and economic impact of transportation investment studies. Ineligible activities include NEPA documentation, engineering, design, acquisition, and construction activities. It's important to note that project managers will be asked to complete a quarterly reporting and invoicing form in order to provide updates on the status and to request reimbursement once costs have been incurred. If using consultant services, procurement of consultants must be chosen in compliance with state and federal regulations. In question 1, provide a brief summary of the project location, purpose, and need. In question 2, describe how the project's objectives meet one or more of the goals and objectives of the 2045 MTP. A link is provided here for your reference. In question 3, provide a brief summary of the project scope, including major milestones and anticipated deliverables. Here you should identify which type of study activity you will undertake with your local planning project. The project start date in question 4 should be after the funds are awarded. It is fine for it to be approximate, so putting a date in late February of 2020 or later would demonstrate that understanding. The project end date should be based on a real assessment of the proposed scope of work. Typically, these projects take around 12 months to complete, but some may run up to 18 months. You should not submit a request for something that will take longer than that to complete. For questions 6 through 8, state the total anticipated cost, the request amount, and the local match of at least 20%. Typical awards in the past have ranged from $50,000 to $150,000. You do not need to fill out a budget attachment document as part of your application for local planning project funds. However, if you have any supporting documentation related to your proposed project, you may submit those attachments. This is optional. Finally, we want applicants to affirm that they understand these funds are provided on a reimbursement basis and should be requested quarterly, accompanied by a progress report, invoices, and proof of payment. At this point, you would click Submit, and the application form will be transmitted to CRTPO staff. We're now going to shift gears and cover the application for additional discretionary funds, also referred to as a shortfall request. As the description says, this type of request is for existing projects already awarded STBGDA, TAPDA, CMAQ, or bonus allocation funds through CRTPO's discretionary funding process. Existing projects that don't meet that description and have instead received some other funding, whether it's state safety funds, highway trust funds, or another source, would need to submit the new request application, which we covered earlier. This type of project would be new to CRTPO and its discretionary funds process, and we want to make sure we're collecting the same data for all of our new projects. If you're not clear on which option to select for your project type, again, contact us as soon as possible. In questions 1 through 3, we're gathering background information on the existing project. There's just one shortfall application for capital projects, whether it is a roadway, bicycle, pedestrian, or transit project. In questions 4 through 12, we're asking a series of questions related to funding authorization, the work that has been completed to date, and the remaining project schedule. These questions are straightforward data points that we need to establish the status of the project at the present date. Neil will describe the next few questions, which address the need for the additional funds.
This is your opportunity to be specific about the factors that have contributed to a need for additional funds. In questions 14 and 15, let us know if the project has a higher cost estimate than the original and why, or if unexpected costs related to right-of-way or utility relocation have led to cost estimate increases. Be ready to provide supporting documentation for each applicable reason, which will be covered at the end of the application. Aaron will cover the next group of questions related to the budget.
As the language below question 18 says, you'll also need to submit a detailed cost estimate and attachment 1B, which is found on our website. As we stated previously, we recommend completing the attachment, then plugging the information into questions 18 through 30 that relate to the budget. Before we look closer at the budget table, I want to bring your attention to the language on page 1 of attachment 1B, which reads, if you are requesting to receive funds for a project phase, such as preliminary engineering, right-of-way, or construction, that does not currently have discretionary funds programmed to it, that phase must now be completed in compliance with all applicable federal regulations. Meeting those requirements may lengthen the project schedule. Also, funds that are awarded may only be applied to new costs that will be incurred and may not be used toward previous activities undertaken prior to award. If you have any questions on your ability to comply with both of those requirements as you are requesting additional shortfall funds, please contact us with your concerns. Now on to page 2. This table is requesting the same information as attachment 1A in the rows 1 through 7, except instead of only 1 column, we would like you to provide 3 columns of information to show the actual shortfall amount for the project. In the first column, original estimate, fill in the fields to the best of your ability. We recognize that the contingency amount and CEI costs were likely calculated differently then than what is required now, and that's fine. What we're interested in seeing is the difference between the original cost and the revised cost, especially for construction, right-of-way, and PE. From there, calculating the right contingency amount and CEI cost in the shortfall column will help ensure the project is adequately funded and additional cost overruns do not occur for this project. Regarding the local match, if the original agreement for this project has a local match greater than 20%, you may use 20% local match for the shortfall request amount. However, if there is a need to reduce the match percentage for the entire project budget, we would like you to submit your application as a new project request so that the project can be rescored. Once you have answered the corresponding budget questions in the application, there is one final question. And I will note, we do have a sample budget table for new requests in our policy document, and it may also be advantageous for us to post a sample budget table for shortfall requests. So keep an eye out for that on the Discretionary Projects webpage. So this is just the second part of the attachment 1B. It goes on to a third page, but it's the same contingency table that is used for the new request attachment. Here, we're asking you to indicate which attachments you're submitting to support your request for shortfall funding. The budget attachment 1B is required. The original cost estimate is also required. The types of other supporting documentation you submit will depend on the circumstances of your project's funding shortfall, as you've described it earlier in questions 14 and 15. Once this question is complete, you can click Submit, and the application form will be transmitted to CRTPO staff. Finally, we have an application for existing local planning projects to request additional funds. Again, in the first few questions, we want to gather information on the existing project and the activities that have been completed to date, as well as identifying the likely timetable for completing the remaining work. Next, it is your opportunity to describe what has occurred to date to create a need for additional funding for the project. In question 4, please note if there will be any minor impacts on the project scope or the nature of the project as a result of the circumstances that have led to a project shortfall for your planning project. In question 5, provide the date that the project commenced. Then provide the project end date. It's possible it has changed since the initial application. In questions 7 through 9, provide the current project cost, the amount of additional funds being requested, and the new total local match. Of course, the local match should be 20%. Finally, any documentation that supports the need for additional funds should be provided and identified in the application. You'll notice at the end of the application, of each application, it says, a copy of your responses will be emailed to the address you provided. That is the email address that you enter on the first screen of the application. If for some reason you don't receive a copy of your responses and you would like one, let us know and we can send you a PDF of your application document. This concludes our presentation, unless Neil and Curtis have anything else to add at this point. Otherwise, we'll now move on to responding to any questions we've received. So at this point, we have not received any questions in the chat box. We're going to give folks a minute or so. On your GoToMeeting screen, you should see a list of other attendees, and then a little box that says chat, and you can type in any questions. Also, if you know of anyone who wanted to participate today but didn't get the chance, we will be posting the recording of this webinar on our website. We'll also be able to include a transcript of the comments that were made. And if we receive any questions, we'll be able to document those and the answers and post those as well.
We've received a few questions here. So in response to the first one, if you had a bid in hand, is the contingency still 25% or another figure? Yeah, and I think the way that our policy works, that we still do apply a 25% contingency if you have the bid documents in hand. Looking at a question here from Sherry Ashley on the shortfall application, 18, 19, and 20, are these numbers only the difference needed?
Okay, so for questions 18, 19, and 20, this is asking for the current total cost that has been estimated for each of these phases. So it's not asking for the difference between the original and the current, it's actually asking for the current cost. Hopefully that's what that was getting at.
So you have a question here from Kelly Crump. Is the project start date and completion date dealing with construction? I would think that it would deal with, and I'd have to look at the specific question, but wouldn't it deal with right-of-way acquisition too? Or are we just asking for construction? I can't remember now.
I mean, it'll partly be driven by the work that is identified as the scope in the application. So if a project was asking for funds for all three phases, I think the start would be the start of PE. If they were only asking for construction funds, then it would be the start of construction. So I think it would be specific to the project. Obviously, in the case of planning projects, it's more straightforward, and it's just the start of their work with planning. Clarification here from Sherry, who asked about questions 18, 19, and 20. Is it the total cost including the shortfall needed? So yes, this would be the current total cost, which would mean that the difference between this and the original is the shortfall, but in questions 18, 19, and 20, it's just asking for the current total cost. We have time for more questions if folks think of any that they want to submit through the chat box.
This one looks like question 21, is the previous match, new match, or total altogether? I think it would be the total altogether of the existing discretionary funding and the match that you put up with that, as well as the match that you're requesting as part of the shortfall.
Yep, that's the intent of that question. And so the next question is this the same for number 23? And in number 23, it's asking to provide the total amount of match that is committed if the additional funds are awarded. And so yes, in this case, we're asking applicants to identify the total match overall. So that would include previous and then factoring in the new shortfall awards, the funds if they're awarded, and what the new match would add. And the next follow-up question, why are two questions asking the same thing? If that is in reference to question 21 and 23, 23 is asking for the actual dollar amount, and 21 is asking for a range of percentages. So in general, these are just data points that are being collected to help evaluate the applications. So it doesn't have to be left to do a lot of these calculations after the fact. Are there any more questions?
All right, folks, once again, thank you for calling in and participating in this webinar. As Erin had mentioned, we will be posting a video of the webinar on our website and a transcript of the webinar, and we'll send out an email once that's up with how to access those materials. But in the meantime, if you all have any questions, feel free to email or call Erin or myself or any of the other CRTPO staff, and we can assist you with answering your questions. So just again, a reminder of the schedule. The discretionary call window will remain open until October 31st. So Looking forward to receiving your applications, and don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you have questions, comments, or concerns. So once again, thanks for your time.
Thank you.